Alrighty, last video on goals here. We'll go over two very related strategies for goal setting, and then we'll also talk about just a couple of limitations of goal setting and why it's not the end all be all, why we need um, more than just goal setting, which we'll talk about then in the next couple of topics. But one very common popular strategy for setting goals is called mental contrasting. And so, again, as we talked about previously, we now know that when setting goals, it's really important to make them specific, to make our goals challenging, but not too challenging. We've seen that approach oriented goals are typically better. And we know that the goals that we're making need to be important to us. So, what can we do to increase the likelihood that the goals that we set include these characteristics? Um, so, again, the strategy here is mental contrasting. It includes a couple different aspects. The first is positive fantasy. And so, this is where we think about the goal and we think about this is theoretically then getting at the motivation piece where we think about why we want to achieve this goal. So an example of striving to get a degree, right? Why will getting a degree be so great? How is that going to help me? Why am I doing this in the first place? So positive fantasy just gets at kind of reminding ourselves of the importance of why we're setting these goals. Additionally, the second piece of this is called negative reality. So this is where we think about the existing obstacles that could come up in pursuing this goal. So for an example, when our goal is to get a degree, an obstacle could be knowing that maybe a certain class is going to be really difficult, right? And so the possibility of failure for that class is higher. Um, Only doing this negative reality piece is not so great, right? It can be pretty discouraging and actually unmotivating to just think about all the negative parts that we have to get through, which is why the positive fantasy portion is important as well. 'Cause this motivates us and reminds us why we have to get through these difficult things in order to reach this goal that, for whatever reason, is important to us. Maybe for, just whatever career we want to have that will maybe improve our happiness or whatever that might be. And then the final piece here is to take both of these individual aspects and contrast them. The name mental contrasting now makes sense. And so this is a comparison of that desired goal, why we want that goal, with the negative reality and the obstacles that we need to get through in order to reach this goal that we want. And based on this, we're more likely to set challenging goals as well as a couple of other things that we'll see here. Um, so this show just shows some more mental contrasting benefits. When we have either high or low expectations of success. And so with high expectations of success, that's going to be kind of in the 4 or 5 area here. This dark line is the contrasting group. So for the mental contrasting group, relative to those who just do either of the positive fantasy or the negative reality, we see greater feelings of being energized. We see more effort being put into reaching goals. And finally, the combination of these two things leads to greater overall achievement. And interestingly, what we see is the opposite of that when expectations of success are low. So then we see less feelings of being energized, less effort, and less achievement um, for this mental contrasting group. And you might say, okay, so then mental contrasting is only good when we expect to be successful. But I wouldn't necessarily say that's true. I would say that with this mental contrasting, we probably have a better idea actually of whether or not we can be successful in the first place. And then if we don't think that our um, likelihood of reaching the goal is very high, right? We talked about how not only is changing effort important, but we talked about how we can also just change our goals in general. So we can either, um, improve our goal, or we can quit and disengage from our goal, which is not always a bad thing. So just in general, mental contrasting allows us to be better at figuring out which of our goals will be useful. So what is going to be challenging enough that it will lead to some type of achievement, but what is also not too challenging to the point where it doesn't make any sense for me to strive for this goal, right? And it's also just important for overall motivation. So getting those feelings of energization for why am I doing this, right? Um, the second strategy, which is very definitely related and very similar to mental contrasting, is this idea of process and outcome simulations. And so an outcome simulation is going to sound very similar to that positive fantasy. So this is thinking about what will it be like to achieve the goal. So I have this goal in my mind. When I achieve it, what's that going to be like? Why is this a good thing? Versus process goals, you can kind of, or sorry, not process goals, process simulations. You can think about this in terms of a bit of a precursor to planning. And so this is different from that negative reality part in mental contrasting. This is where you would imagine the steps needed to bring about the goal. So I want to get my degree. That's my goal. I know that when I get this goal, when I get this outcome, I'll be feeling pretty good. And now with the process simulation, as I strive for this goal, I need to take X amount of classes. I need to get a certain GPA. Things like that would be process simulations. And we see that process um, and outcome simulations are generally very functional when predicting behavior. And so one reasoning for this that we see in this research is that process simulations implicate and activate the working memory. And this occurs in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. And we talked a while ago about some of the benefits that the lateral and dorsolateral prefrontal cortex can have in terms of just general self-regulation, which is why this then is likely so good at predicting behavior. Additionally, these outcome simulations implicate and activate some emotion areas in the brain, such as the medial prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. And again, previously we've also talked about how important emotions are for striving for goals and getting us to be motivated to reach certain goals. So overall, process and outcome simulations can be important in this goal setting topic, and very similarly to mental contrasting in that way. So we definitely see benefits for both of these strategies. Later on in the course, we'll take more specifically the mental contrasting than these simulations, but we'll take these ideas and we will add the things like planning to them. Because again, as we'll talk about some limitations on the next slide, just setting goals isn't the end all be all. And so things like good planning are needed. So we'll get into both volition, so goal striving, as well as self-regulation, where certain strategies can be paired with this initial goal setting to really increase the likelihood of making it so that we behave in ways that allow us to be more likely to achieve our goals. And we'll also, we'll come back to this mental contrasting idea, which helps us, again, recognize what we need to plan for with that negative reality piece, which will be important when we get into self-regulation topics. So anyways, last slide here, just want to go over a few limitations of goal setting. So there are cases or scenarios where goal setting is best, and there are scenarios where goal setting may not be as important or may not be as beneficial, I should say. Um, so we notice that goal setting is typically best for tasks that are quantitative or have quantitative pieces to them and are relatively uninteresting or boring. So, for an example, if going to the gym doesn't intrinsically excite you, right? But it's still something that you think will be good for you and something that you want to do. So you set a goal. This is something that goal setting can be pretty beneficial for because it's not that interesting to you inherently. And it also can be built into or include quantitative pieces. So, an example, having a goal of going to the gym 3 days a week, right? That includes a quantitative piece so we can measure whether or not we are meeting that goal, and then we can get that feedback loop into play and the aspiration aspects in terms of should we make this easier, more difficult. Um, if you are interested in going to the gym, that's great. Goals setting can certainly still be beneficial, but maybe it's less needed because you're already intrinsically wanting to go to the gym anyways. So if that's something you're already interested in, it might still be beneficial to set a goal, but it would be less important. It's really, if you find going to the gym uninteresting or boring, it's going to be more vital for your behavior going forward to set these goals. When it comes to things like creativity and tasks that require certain insight, it's less beneficial to do goal setting for these type of tasks because it's more than just regulating effort, which is what goal setting is really good for. So for an example, if you are wanting to or need to for a job or something create a new tech product, goal setting can be kind of beneficial from the standpoint of like, okay, you set this goal and you can also get at this planning precursor, right? Where maybe you can then decide however many hours a week we'll put into this or something like that. But in general, there's just only so much that goal setting can do here. And even though you can begin to do the process simulations, and you can certainly do the outcome simulations and be motivated to do that, but the process simulations in general are going to be quite a bit more difficult and quite a bit more difficult to make quantitative, which is why then goal setting is less helpful here. And finally, a major limitation, right, is that goal setting is an intention. And so goal setting does not require the behavior part that's also very important for reaching goals. And so this idea of goal setting is very good for giving us direction, but it's not, we need more. We need not just process simulations, we also need actual planning. We need um, volition, which is we'll talk about more actually in the next section, as well as certain self-regulation strategies that will help us maintain these behaviors, not just the intentions that are important for goal striving. So I think the easiest way to, or maybe the most popular intention behavior gap, I think, is with New Year's resolutions, right? These are so popular. A large portion of people will make these New Year's resolutions. And if you are someone who goes to the gym, you literally see these New Year's resolutions when you see a lot more people there in January and February. But then you start to see this intention behavior gap where less and less people are going to the gym, in March, June, September until those New Year's resolutions are made again. So that's just to point out that there is this intention behavior gap and we need more than just goal setting. And we'll talk about then some strategies in these next couple of sections that can be paired with goal setting and really try to create an overall baseline of strategies that can help us with general goal striving and motivation, volition, those types of things. So yeah, that's it. Motivation and volition will be next.